3,000 feet. You're looking great.
This is the podcast where inspiring leaders share their stories to empower you, unlock your potential, and create a winning mindset for your future. My name is Luke Murfitt, the UK Entrepreneur of the Year, and my co-host is thought leader Kim Adele. Welcome to Global Futurists. Hello and welcome to Global Futurists. My name is Luke Murfitt.
And I'm Kim Adele.
And today we have the future here in person. His name is David Wood. Hello, David. Good morning.
My pleasure. Good to see you
David.
both.
Nice
David
to see you
Wood.
too.
Yeah, David Wood is one of the lead futurists, pretty much in the world. He's the chair of London Futurists. He was involved in this smartphone industry pioneer. That's a Symbian co-founder. That's part of the Nokia, sort of, how do we say it, David?
Nokia ecosystem. We were a close partner of Nokia. They used the Symbian software in their first generation of smartphones.
Great. Principal of Delta Wisdom, Singularity and Transhumanist, Executive Director of Transpolitica, with a background in mathematics and the philosophy of science. Author or lead editor of 9 books, including Raft 2035, Smartphones and Beyond, The Abolition of Aging, Sustainable Superabundance, and Transcending Politics. Now, that's quite a lot for me to say at such a time in the morning, so I'm quite proud of myself.
Well done.
Thank you. So, David, good morning to you. We're really thrilled to have you on Global Futurists. We really want to be able to increase the conversation and the thought process of people and our listeners to really think about what's relevant, how we can learn from people's backgrounds and the way they're addressing, obviously, the future, preparing. So, over to you. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit more about your background and some of the things that got you to where you are.
So I served 25 years in the mobile computing and smartphone space from 1988 up to 2013. And that was a space which changed remarkably. It changed slowly for a long time. We had lots of visions about more and more people using mobile computers and smartphones, but for a long time, nothing much changed until it took off in this, what people sometimes call an exponential shape, moving from slow and disappointing change to fast and dramatic change. It's a great example, a terrible example of disruption. And in the process, many other companies stumbled and failed. And in due course, in fact, the companies I was closely working with stumbled and failed due to subsequent waves of disruption. But it's my view that the changes which took place with information technology, computing, and connectivity are a foretaste for other significant changes that will come in other fields. We're starting to see that with artificial intelligence. We're starting to see that with biotech. We're seeing that with cognotechnology, which is our understanding of how to improve the brain, and we're going to see it with nanotechnology as well.
Wow. You've been through some fascinating changes, and you're right, the mobile industry went through loads, didn't it? You know, I remember there used to be the race to get the smallest phone possible, until then you really realized that now you can get even more things on it, and now you actually want a bigger screen so you can actually read them. So it kind of evolved so dramatically, just in a short period of time, didn't it? Can I ask, as a futurist, what did you learn from the forecasts that you got wrong over the years that help you now in the future?
Well, we got many things right and many things wrong. To be clear, futurists don't always want their forecasts to come true. Sometimes we raise a possibility to try and spur people to stop that future happening. It's a sort of self-unfulfilling prophecy when we say, if we keep on going as on current trajectory, it's going to be a bad outcome.
Yeah.
And other times we do forecasts, not because we're trying to predict what the future will be, but because we're just trying to stretch people's minds as to possibilities. futurism is a lot about imagination as well as about trend watching. So there's a lot of analysis, but there needs to be creativity too. And the point of that is not to define exactly what will happen, but to give people a better awareness of present possibilities rather than future possibilities. But I have to say, yes, we did get some things wrong about the scale, ultimately, of the smartphone business. I wrote a forecast in 2001, which is still on my corporate website, Delta Wisdom, in which I talked about the likely evolution of smartphones over the rest of that decade. I said that although in 2001 there are extremely few smartphones in use, that by 2007 there would be 100 million running the operating system smartphone that myself and colleagues had helped to write. And by and large, that forecast panned out well. But I didn't really anticipate quite how big things would become even in the longer term. I wrote in that essay one line that it's $1 billion question which operating system will triumph in the future. In retrospect, I should have said it's $1 trillion question because the company that really got that right, Apple, became the first publicly traded company with a valuation of more than $1 trillion. And so, again, it's this story that we tend to overestimate the changes in the short term, but underestimate the truly larger changes that will come further down the line.
Fabulous, yeah. Well, what an amazing impact that that we can get from learning from that, isn't it? It's like, you know, looking at the things that went really, really well, and also you know, looking at the scale of the opportunity.
Yeah.
There was another thing that we didn't quite get right either, which I think is a lesson, which is we tended to discount Silicon Valley. We thought that Silicon Valley had done very well in the fixed and laptop computers, but their first attempts to break into the smartphone space had all been failures. Many companies in Silicon Valley tried to make good smartphones, but by and large, their phones were terrible. So the first attempt by Apple, which is now widely forgotten, was a joint project with Motorola, producing something called the Rocker. And it was a bit of a disaster, and Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple, had a public falling out with the person who headed Motorola at the time. Microsoft had also failed again and again to succeed in that space. And we, in the mobile phone community, discounted the possibility of Silicon Valley to strike back. But you know what? Over a time, the main product proposition changed in a significant way. It was no longer that the most important app on these devices was the phone itself, with a great signal quality and great voice. Increasingly, that was a lesser concern, and what people wanted from their smartphones is something to look at, something that had a great browsing experience, something that had apps. And the phone was just one of a number of apps. And at the same time, the technology to enable the actual phone connectivity became more standardized, and that meant that Silicon Valley could transform from being a laggard in this space to being a world leader. And that's another example for people in other industries, that sometimes you look at potential competitors struggling, you look at outsiders and you say, no, they're never going to be able to come and eat our breakfast. But as times change, especially as the core product proposition changes in some ways, which takes some imagination to see in advance, then suddenly you are behind and it can be too late.
Yep, all great points. And I think that is one of the things that is true of all industry, isn't it? I think sometimes so I spent a lot of years in financial services, and they would look at each other as their competition. And actually, your customers are looking at every interaction they have with every organization and saying, well, why can't I have more like that? So actually, you know, that's why we've now got challenger brands coming into the financial services that are doing really, really well. So I think you're very right. It is around that, always looking at what might happen and what could evolve and what your customer is looking for, and how you learn from that, isn't it? I think that's probably most critical. So is there any hints and tips that you've got around how do you determine what you think might be an opportunity and what could be coming next?
Well, this is a very difficult field, let's be frank, and I don't think any one person or even one company can reliably do this by themselves. So one of my key messages is collaborative futurism. You can't really anticipate the future reliably by yourself. You have to connect with the groups of people who are sharing the task of trend spotting and trend analysis. And this might even be collaborating with some of your current competitors in various industry alliances, because there are common benefits to seeing what the future is and sharing some of the task in creating longer term capabilities that will see the whole industry through possible upheavals. So collaborating and spotting trends. I sometimes talk about the ABCs of trends. Trends aren't just projecting what you can see today. Trends are about knowing what might cause these trends, as I've already said, to accelerate and break through. Trends are also about seeing what can cause the breaks, which might slow things down, because often possibilities don't come about, and it's because of some constraints, some breaking factors, which is good to understand. And thirdly, the C is for canary signals, which is something that will alert you that change is now afoot. Change which you were anticipating but didn't really believe and didn't know when it would happen. There's an early sign, just like when the miners of old took these poor yellow birds down the mines because they were more susceptible to changes in the atmosphere. So we should tell ourselves that regardless of whether we truly believe in various breakthrough trends about to happen, we will discover some canary signals, and when that happens, my goodness, we're going to put lots more attention at the highest level of management quickly onto these fields.
David, before I talk to you and ask you about sustainable superabundance, which is going to be an interesting topic, which I know that you specialize on, let me just ask you, you're chair of the London Futurists group with 8,000 people, members. Why would someone be part of the Futurists group? What draws them in, and what sort of things do you plan to? How do you chair? Why are you chair of the London Futurists? What does it bring?
So the London Futurists embodies some of what I was just talking about. It's a collaborative community that shares insights about what the future may bring. Our mission is that we should have serious analysis of radical scenarios for the next, we say, 3 to 40 years. So we're not looking at what's in the next release of Android or what the next iteration of blockchain may deliver. We're rather looking at longer term changes. We say 3 years because a lot actually can happen in 3 years, and looking further ahead too, because it turns out that some things that you initially think may take 20 years could actually come in much less time once you see things differently. So our meetings typically have 1 or 2 speakers who will set out a vision for the future, and then the community gets involved with questions and conversations to kick holes in these series. We're actually trying to answer 3 questions. Which of these scenarios stand up from a credibility point of view? Does the technology story really make sense? Also, sociologically, does it make sense? Because sometimes things are possible technically, but they're not going to happen until or unless there are changes in people's attitudes. So there's a credibility question. Then there's a harder question, which is the desirability question. If such changes would happen, would it be good or bad? And our instincts often let us down here, because our instincts are grounded in the past, and the past is not always a good guide to future possibilities. So we might have a wow instinct or a yuck instinct, 2 3-letter words, and in both cases they might mislead us. So we got to go beyond the initial future shock and think a little bit more carefully to see that some of the exciting futures may actually be terrible once we think it through, and conversely, some of the things that initially we feel uncomfortable about could actually be good scenarios for us. When I say us, I mean for businesses, there could be a way to evolve, to cope. For individuals, there could be ways to change their life, focusing their skills, the relationships, so they can thrive in this new world, which initially they didn't like. But it takes the courage to see that. And the final question is the actionability. What can we do to prepare for thriving in these future scenarios?
So, David, you wrote a book, Sustainable Superabundance. I think many of our listeners, we won't know actually what sustainable superabundance is. I think it would be nice if you could just give us an insight into what that is and what your thought process is about with sustainable superabundance. Yeah.
So this is a vision for how society could be in a relatively short period of time. certainly by the middle of the century, arguably by 2035. It's that there will be enough for everybody around the world, without exception, to have a really good quality of life. That there is enough energy hitting the earth from the sun. If we were to collect it properly, we could develop a renewables industry faster than we're already doing, and we could have enough energy for all our needs without heating up the earth in runaway climate change. There's enough food for many more people than are currently alive, provided, again, we take advantage of technology, things like agriculture in the oceans, things like lab-grown meat, so we could all have delicious food, but without needing to grow animals and slaughter them. Things like vertical farming and things like artificial photosynthesis. More generally, I foresee the possibility that society can have higher levels of intelligence, higher levels of creativity, higher levels of collaboration and democracy. But none of this can be taken for granted. For each of the technology areas I've mentioned, there are terrible ways in which the technology could be misused. And in each case, we could lead to quite drastic bad changes in society, some of which we're already seeing, sadly, with the greater connectivity of air travel and the greater connectivity of online information. We are more vulnerable all the time to different kinds of viruses, whether it's biological viruses or misinformation, fake news. We're vulnerable to some of the darker aspects of our inner demons being magnified by technology, rather than what Abraham Lincoln called the inner angels of our character. So the future is quite drastic, and let's say bring these possibilities into people's thinking about what this means here and now. And the sustainability is key as well. Sustainability means that this isn't just something for for now. It's something that can be long-term developed and supported.
Wow. I mean, it certainly would be nice to think that we could live in a world where there is enough for everybody, and that we didn't have the inequality and the poverty that we sadly do see today. But can I ask, what do you think are the most important skills to be able to thrive in this new world where AI and technology are expanding at such pace?
So because of the greater pace of change, I think the most important skill is to cope with change. It's to be comfortable with change. It's not to commit to one long-term plan and then rigidly stick to that despite everything else that's happening. So sometimes this is called agility. There is a whole field called agile development. It started off in software. It's not just a buzzword. There are particular skills in breaking up possible large changes into shorter, meaningful sprints. So there are techniques with agile, which are important. But even more than that, I think there's the emotional underpinnings that will make people comfortable with change, comfortable with experimentation, willing to take risks and actually fail, but to learn from the failures rather than trying to hide the failures. And so it is a matter of soft skills. Soft skills have, of course, always been important, but in my view, they're even more important than before. It's always been important when you put together a team, not just to think about the collective IQ, but to think about the collective EQ, the emotional capabilities and resilience. That, I believe, is stronger. And there's one more skill, which I do have to mention too, which is the skill of politics. That's not just small p for working in groups, it's large P. It's influencing the political landscape in which we all operate, because frankly, there aren't going to be jobs for everybody in the future to come. Frankly, many people are going to find that automation is able to do most of their job better than them. And actually, we should welcome that outcome. We should welcome the fact that we no longer need to work in back-breaking or soul-destroying ways. We should welcome the fact that we can work many fewer hours and still have a good income. And with the sustainable superabundance, it means that more things are available at much lower price. But we do need political support in that, with things like the drive towards an abundance economy to focus on general well-being instead of the gross domestic product, to focus on enabling people to be unemployed if they wish to be unemployed, rather than scolding them and saying you've got to hurry off back to work, otherwise you are a third-class citizen. So this involves things like a universal basic income, universal basic services, which we do need governments to get involved with. And so actually, more of us will need to get involved in finding ways to influence and change our political leaders so that this better future, a world of greater change, a world of greater creativity, can come about.
Interesting. I must ask, what has recent developments of COVID-19 done to the sort of things that you were talking about 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, we futurists have often talked about forthcoming pandemics. Bill Gates famously gave a 2015 TED Talk in which he said the thing he feared most for killing possibly tens of millions of people is a pandemic. Other futurists have written systematically about this for 20 years or so, and we have to realize our message did not get through. We can complain about the rest of the world not paying enough attention, but also we futurists have got to think about more effective ways of communicating risks. Because actually the pandemic that we're living through today, terrible though it is, hugely disruptive though it is to many people's businesses, is by no means the worst change and risk that could happen. There are worse pandemics that could take place, especially if people bioengineer variants of pathogens. And by the way, there are a very small minority, but there are some people in various fundamentalist groups, whether it's groups like ISIS or groups like the Japanese Buddhist splinter sect Om Shinrikyo, who actually do want to use this technology to destroy large parts of the world. So we need to prepare better. And we futurists have got to think about new ways to capture the imagination of the world in the wake of coming out of. Some people say that what we're living through is almost like a World War III now. Of course, it's not the World War III we anticipated, but it is a global catastrophic change of one sort. And just after First World War, the world rethought and tried to create a League of Nations, didn't do it very well. After the Second World War, people were much more thoughtful and set up a whole range of global institutions. There was the agreement on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There was the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the WHO, and others. Well, now out of this sort of World War III, it's a possibility to prepare global institutions much more effectively for risks in the future. It's also to prepare our society as a whole to be more resilient and more agile so that when shocks do come, as they will, we can take them in our stride rather than being knocked off our course in such a shocking way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It has been a shock for everybody, hasn't it? You know, I often refer to it as an enforced moment of pause, and I think it is giving us a chance to reflect and reevaluate. But you're quite right, we do need to also consider how do we learn from this and how do we become more resilient to future shocks and future challenges. So to be really cheeky, could I ask you, what do you think might be the biggest potential changes that could come about in the next 10, 15 years?
Well, one change is we're going to see even more artificial intelligence than currently. And artificial intelligence is everywhere these days. It's on our job applications, our CVs get processed by how we can go most effectively from place A to place B. It's in our dating software that figures out who we should hook up with. But that's just the beginning. I believe there's going to be new waves of change with artificial intelligence, and the machines are therefore going to be generally intelligent with greater capabilities. And we humans are on the point of becoming only the second most intelligent species on the planet. And if you look at the gorillas as an example, the future of gorillas is not in the hands of gorillas. It's in the hands of we humans. And if we're not careful, the future of humans will no longer be in our hands. It'll be in very powerful algorithms controlled by very powerful corporations. That is one change that more people can see coming. There is another change, which I would like to briefly mention as well, which is the change in healthcare. That healthcare will improve with artificial intelligence to help us, with biotech to help us, with nanotech to help us, and we'll have more capabilities, not just to look younger. There's already a huge anti-aging industry and cosmetics, but increasingly we're going to be able to copy what's being done already in smaller and shorter-lived animals, in which biotechnology experts have managed to rejuvenate them so their lifespans become double or triple, or even in one case recently 5 times as long. So I think the possibility of anti-aging, or the abolition of aging, is going to come to people's minds. Now, it may not yet be in place by 10 years or 15 years time, but people are going to know that it's coming. And as a result of that, they'll start changing their plans for the future, because they know if they can live healthy long enough, it might take them into the possibility to live healthy for centuries to come.
David, very, very high level, intelligent conversation here, and some interesting thoughts. One that's not very, not the best, most interesting or intelligent questions, but if you were to name 3 films that are out there now, which 3 best describe what you would say is realistic for the future? And of those 3, which one would be the number 1, and why?
Well, I have to think about this.
I'm sure.
One film which I think does is Ex Machina, or Ex Machina, which sets the development of an AI into interesting light, and it shows, don't want to give too many plot points away, but it shows the difficulty of controlling an intelligence which is smarter than us. And it also raises questions about consciousness. So that is worth looking at. In a different way, there's the film Hair, which features Joaquin Phoenix as somebody who falls in love with his operating system. And we think, well, that's crazy. Why would people fall in love with their computers? But I think it's going to happen. There's going to be fascinating chatbots which know how to write buttons. After all, who do we fall in love with? We fall in love with people who manage to have fascinating conversations with. They make us discover things, and so that's another sign for the future. I'll just pick my favorite film finally. It's a film that emphasizes a great human endeavor. It's Chariots of Fire. It's a film I've seen probably about 7 times at least. It's a film set in 1920, so it's hardly a film about the future, but it's a film about people achieving greatness through adversity. And even though the world will be different because of technology, there are some things that do not change, and that's the ability to inspire athletes who are central in that film. For what we'll need in the future.
That's very interesting. So Chariots of Fire, that's with Eric Liddell, isn't it?
It is indeed. It's about Eric Liddell, and he studied at the same college as I did in Cambridge a few years before me, I have to say, which is one reason.
Not at the same time, no.
No, that's right. Although I was there when the film was filmed in 1980 or so. It was all closed down for one day as they filmed the outside of the college.
Yeah, that's great. Chariots of Fire. So those 3 films again, just for people listening, so we can look out for them. So we've got Chariots of Fire, of course. Number
Ex Machina and Hair, H-E-R.
H-E-R. Interesting.
I probably, if I thought about it longer, I would have better examples to point to.
Sure. Well, that's a good 3. Yeah, Kimidel, what are your thoughts on?
Wow. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and certainly lots of food for thought. And I think it's interesting your points around the requirement for us to be much more in touch with our emotional intelligence and our ability to get comfortable with change and continuous change. So not thinking it's a one and done, but actually how do we continue to evolve? and learn from the changes that are going through, and how do we do that with perhaps a bit more humanity and more social influence as well from our leaders, which I know has also been predicted when we look at the World Economic Forum's skills matrix of 2022. So it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. I've learned loads, and I'm definitely going to go away and have a look at some of those books and films and continue my learning. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Of course, the one question that we'd like to ask people is, what would you tell yourself many years ago if you were in your 20s?
I would possibly say to myself to put more priority on human relationships rather than just the technology. In fact, one of my bosses did do that. After I'd worked in Cyan for about a year, he sat me down and said, "David, you're working so hard during at lunchtimes at your desk. Why don't you go out and have lunch with your colleagues and chat to them?" And it was a great piece of advice, because we are much stronger as teams. Although in retrospect, probably I should have worked harder at developing a whole network of relationships, understanding what are the messages that each person would be most amenable to with, because it's not just one type of talking that's suitable for everybody. We have to learn what's the right message for each of our co-workers, each of our colleagues to hear. And that's probably what I should have done differently in earlier phases of my career.
That's brilliant. Thank you. David Wood, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure that this has been a great listen for our listeners. We would encourage everyone to obviously like, subscribe and share this podcast. And obviously you can find us on cmx.co.uk/global-futurists. Find us there. You can find other podcasts as well. Next week we have Rohit. Do you know Rohit?
I know Rohit Talwar well. He's a fascinating and very thoughtful futurist who also sees the big possibilities, but is also very aware of the soft skills angle that is increasingly critical.
Absolutely. So international speaker Rohit on futurists. It's going to be very interesting. So we do look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Kim Adele, thank you. Also, it's been a pleasure, hasn't it?
It's been an absolute pleasure as always. And David, a delight. Thank you so much. And looking forward to seeing everybody next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. David, take care. God bless you. And my final word would be, the future starts today.
It does, indeed.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
You take care. Thanks, Kun.